When you think of roller coaster manufacturers that are in competition for some of the best and most successful in the coaster industry, you'll probably think of RMC, Intamin, Mach, or even B&M. But I'm just going to take a guess and say that your first thought probably wasn't S&S. But just by looking at some of their craziest roller coasters, this should be true. They should be one of the best coaster manufacturers. So what happened? Well, to answer this question, we're going to need to take an in-depth look at the history of S&S and where they are today, and most importantly, the future. S&S worldwide has built a pretty good amount of coasters, 42 to be exact, with 37 of them still in operation. They have a very diverse collection of models like air launch coasters, many different types that either spin, rotate, or flip, and even some wooden roller coasters. The company was founded back in 1994 by Stan Checketts, sorry if I got that wrong, and the headquarters are located in Logan, Utah. Except back in the 90s, they were more known for their space shot rides, which were pretty much just launch drop towers that used the pneumatic air launch system. It wasn't until March of 2001 when they opened their first ever roller coaster. Hypersonic XLC at King's Dominion used the same launch system from the space shots, just this time on a roller coaster. It launched the train from 0 to 80 miles per hour in just 1.8 seconds, and it was very loud. But this was nothing compared to what they would open next. Later that year, in December of 2001, a park in Japan called Fuji-Q Highland opened Do-Dodonpa, the world's fastest accelerating roller coaster. And it would keep that title for all of the years that it was open, and it'll probably keep that title, or at least the title it used to have, forever. It had an insane acceleration rate of 0 to 107 miles per hour in only 1.8 seconds, which pulled an insane 2.7 Gs of acceleration. But if that wasn't enough, in 2017 when they changed the name to Do-Dodonpa, they also removed the top hat and replaced it with a loop, which meant that it had to reach a higher top speed to be able to consistently clear the loop. So they changed the top speed to about 112 miles per hour, and it reached that in 1.6 seconds. And then it pulled an even more insane 3.2 Gs of acceleration. To put that in perspective, Stealth at Thorpe Park, which is the current record holder for fastest accelerating coaster, only pulls about 1.9 Gs of acceleration. So you can imagine that was probably very insane, and also a little bit too much. It ended up being connected to 18 different injuries, some of them even being broken spines. And this also isn't completely the ride's fault, because the injuries were because of riders who mostly just had an improper riding position, but that still shouldn't really happen on any launch coaster. And this was the first of many mistakes in S&S's problematic history. They've had many failed models where only a few were built, or some models that just never even caught on at all, like their new Rail Rider model that they announced a week ago. One of the main failed models was a Screaming Squirrel model. This was, well, weird is really the only word to describe it. The prototype looked like a wild mouse just turned on its side, but probably the weirdest one was Afterburner at Wonder Island in Russia, which looked like, well, it didn't really look like any other coaster out there. Only 3 of these were built, and now only 1 remains operating. Even a model like the Free Fly coaster, where only 1 ever opened, which was Tronin at Skara Summerland, it worked out fine, but it's just so weird looking that parks would probably rather go with something more normal and higher capacity, because it has a very low capacity. Then you also have the Fourth Dimension roller coasters, which look really cool, but they were not the smoothest, and your legs would hit the seat on every pothole, making you feel like you need knee surgery. Another thing about S&S is that you can't just look at one of their roller coasters and say, I know that was built by S&S. But if you look at a B&M, for example, where you can tell by just the track type, well, except for a few other Giovanolas, but B&M used to work with them, so it's still technically the same kind of track. And I'm not saying that it's a problem to have many different track types. But when a park wants a reliable and intense enough but not too intense coaster, they know that they can rely on B&M to deliver what they ask for and get their ROI or return on investment to consider it worth it. And it'll also be smooth. Well, maybe not so much lately, but it's not usually anything more than just an unwanted rattle. But if you go with a manufacturer like S&S, it might be so unbearably rough, causing it to need a complete full retrack after only one season, which is exactly what happened with Gale Force at Playland's Castaway Cove. I mean, yeah, some B&Ms have gotten full retracks over the years, like Hulk and Nemesis, but those were both after 20 to 30 years of operation, and they weren't rough before the overhaul. The problem was that they're simply just getting past their service life. So that brings me to the biggest problem with S&S, and that's inconsistency. When a park buys a coaster, they don't want it to fail, obviously. They would rather spend a little bit more money and have a coaster that's really good and reliable, and they want it to have a really good reception with park guests. So when you have a manufacturer like B&M who consistently provides a reliable and mostly smooth roller coaster, and the park guests will always love it, then parks are usually going to go with that over a manufacturer like S&S that sometimes is smooth and reliable, and also sometimes unbearably rough, and sometimes so unreliable that for a few different years it doesn't even operate at all. Not to name any names, and even when they try something simple like a wooden roller coaster, it either ends up being just not that great or painfully rough to the point where they have to close off the entire back car because it's just that bad. And like I said earlier, they might even push the limits too far, causing injuries. And I'm not saying that other manufacturers didn't ever do that. For example, when Intimidator 305 was built by Intamin, or now it's called Pantherian, they pushed the limits too far, and the guests didn't really like it that much, because it had too many sustained positive Gs and like a lot of intensity. And for the next 5 years, Intamin slowly started building less and less roller coasters, and it seems to be directly related to I-305 and some of their other failed attractions at the time. But the most important thing is that Intamin never ended up failing in the end. They were able to recover even if it took a few years. A lot of parks still won't work with them, like the Six Flags Entertainment Corporation, but when other parks build Intamins, they are smooth, reliable, and crowd pleasers. And this brings me to my final point, the coaster type that will save S&S. The Access Coaster model was originally announced at IAAPA in 2019. The seats can rotate similar to a free spin, except they are rotating instead of flipping. And it took about 4 years for one of them to get finally announced. It will be going to a park in Saudi Arabia called Transformers. Not the park, the coaster. And if this coaster type proves to be a smooth, reliable crowd pleaser, then S&S might just be saved, because no other manufacturer really offers something quite like this. If it works out, then we could see these coasters opening all over the world. Maybe even parks in the Six Flags chain could start buying them. The original Six Flags chain worked with S&S on Max Force, which seems to be reliable, especially for an air launch coaster, and surprisingly more reliable than the similar but more simple S&S coaster that also opened in 2019. I think there's a good chance that Six Flags Magic Mountain will get an Access coaster for their 2026 project, because they said that it would be the first of its kind in North America. And if that's true, then this is huge. And if it doesn't work out for S&S, then they might not have as much time left as you think. So their future really depends on this model. So in the end, I think S&S looks like a really cool manufacturer. At the moment, I've only ridden a free spin, but some of their other models look really cool, even if they're not the most reliable at times. So if you enjoyed this video, then please like, comment, and subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video.
Crack it.